Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. And thank you, Darren, for allowing us the possibility to share our knowledge and our experience with everyone, pretty much, that has registered and that will view the recording afterwards. Today, I'm going to share with you a bit of my experience working with clients that are looking to purchase land or they have bought land and they discovered some aspects that they did not know before and there were unpleasant surprises. So my aim today is to share my knowledge and hopefully avoid mistakes for people who are looking to purchase land. Now, some of you might already know me, and some of you might have not heard my name before, so I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Laura Litkanu. I am the owner of Unfold Architecture, a practice that focuses on well-being, that is physical, mental, and also financial well-being. Before I opened my practice, I actually managed two other practices. One is a building design practice of up to 20 people at some point, and one is a graphic and interior design studio focused on off-the-plan sales. So I can say that I have quite a broad experience in all stages of the project, both locally and internationally, mostly in the residential field. I have been involved in more than 200 residential projects throughout this time in all the phases that you can see on the screen. Now, a bit of housekeeping. There will be, as Darren said, a Q&A session at the end. Feel free to take notes, and there will be most probably a recording available afterwards. So if you missed anything, you can view that, as well as I will leave you with my email address at the end. So if you have any further questions related to this webinar or you don't know where to start your journey, just pop in an email and I will guide you from there. Now, a bit of a disclaimer, I won't ask you to read all of this, but basically it says that any advice should not be seen as legal advice and you should seek further assistance with that if you're looking for that. And also, this does not represent a contractual agreement between us. What is covered today, there's quite a bit of information to cover. We'll be talking about zoning and overlays, covenants, size and shapes of land, soil orientation. This is a big one, and I will put a lot of focus on it. Above and underground surroundings, a bit about what to measure. One scenario that I get quite a lot from clients, keeping the existing dwelling at the front and subdividing the back. Questions and answers around needing a permit, planning or building permit, and a bit about existing and preferred neighborhood character. Now let's dive in, and as I go, you may feel like you have questions or you would like to dig deeper, pop them in the chat box and we'll come back to them at the end. About zoning and overlays, you'll see here an excerpt from a section 32 that usually potential purchasers get with and it's a planning property report that usually people get with their section 32 when they inquire about the land. In here, they will see what zoning, and they will see something like general residential zone, neighborhood residential zone, activity zone, green wedge zone, and something similar. And they will also see any overlays that are applicable to the land. Now, sometimes the section 32 does not include a detailed schedule to the zone and does not include more details on the overlays. So I popped in here a link that you can go to yourself and look for this information, and you can read about each of the overlays individually. I will actually share with you how that looks like in case you have never seen it before. So now you should be able to see, hopefully, my other screen where I've just popped in an address, not one of my clients, so it's a random one I popped in earlier. And now what you'll see in here is that you can press on Property PDF and Planning PDF. If we go to the Planning PDF, it will open us exactly the planning property report that you get with the Section 32. The difference is that you get the links to actually go into more details about the schedule to the zone. And if you scroll down, you can see any overlays that are applicable. In this case, there's none. For example, there's an Aboriginal cultural heritage sensitivity overlay. For less than 3 dwellings, this does not usually have an impact unless you find something while digging, while during construction. However, for more than 3 dwellings on a land, you may need a consultant, and you usually do, to prepare a report for you. Now, if we want to click on this one, for example, in a schedule to the zone, we will see very specific requirements for that land. For example, in here, what we will see is that even if you want to build one dwelling on the land, if your land is between 300 and 500 square meters, and it says in here that up to 500 square meters, you will need to actually get a planning permit as well, not only a building permit. Now, this can have an impact on timing and cost of your overall exercise of building a dwelling. If we see non-specified, that means that it goes back to the default RES code, Residential Code of Victoria requirements. If you would like to read more and you don't know what that is, you can just search and you will find some information in there. Now, when you read this one, if you see A for standards, it refers to one dwelling on a lot, whereas if you see B, it refers to a multi-unit development. If the land has already been subdivided and someone wants to build something on that vacant lot, we're looking at one dwelling on a lot because the land is already subdivided. Now, some different requirements in this particular case that we're looking at is that the front setback is varied from the standard RES code. And then we'll see if someone wants to build unit developments, they have specific requirements for the area of secluded private open space. Now, I don't want to go into too many details about this particular one because we could talk for hours. But as I said, happy to discuss more with you if you have a particular case that you would like to discuss. Going back to the presentation, one that I wanted to draw attention to is the SBO, or the Special Building Overlay. If you see this applicable to the land you're looking to purchase, this refers to flooding. And sometimes it does not cover the entire area of your land and just covers a part of it. However, it has implications on your future development. What are those? Well, first of all, one thing you can do when you start thinking about the design for what you're planning to do on the land is order a flood level certificate from Melbourne Water. That will state the level that they consider to be the flood level. And from that, let's just say you're planning to build a house. Usually the inside of the house, the finished floor level at ground level, needs to be 300 millimeters above the flood level that you will get in that certificate. Usually garages need to be 150 millimeters above that flood level. Now, if you think about a multi-unit development, for example, this may have implications on the driveway, if it's a shared driveway. Because in order to get to the garages, you might actually have to work with the land to change the slope and to create retaining walls in some cases. And that will have implications on the cost, obviously. Now, I'm not saying that this is something that should put you away from buying property, but you should consider that it may mean steps to go outside, it may mean ramps, and it may mean working with the rest of the levels on the site to create that access. So just consider it usually means some additional expenses or constraints. Now it's one that is quite frequent that I see on lands, and again, as I said, it shouldn't put you away. If you don't see this special building overlay, it does not mean necessarily that your land does not have any constraints regarding flooding, because councils may have their own flood regulations, and If you call council, it's the easiest way to find out if they have any specific requirements around the level that they would like to see for your building. Covenants. This is a very interesting one because it could you could find out uh, things you did not expect before. What is a covenant? For those who don't know, it is a restriction put on the title. Now, in estates, for example, if the estate has been designed to certain regulations, there could be a covenant that says you need to get approval from a committee before you develop anything. So you actually don't need to go through council, but you have to comply with certain guidelines. There are covenants that refer to the fact that you can't dig for a quarry on the land, and those do not usually create any problem for development. They're very old, done in olden days, how my kids like to call it, but they don't have an impact on your development. There are others, however, that have a big impact on your plans, and one that I see quite often is the fact that you can't build more than one dwelling on a land. When I know there might be a covenant like that when I see an ad, and I get some developers that are actually asking me to have a look at lands before they purchase. And sometimes when I see a land that is looks like a good land for unit development, but the real estate ad, does not say subject to council approval unit development, I know there must be a covenant in place. If they only refer to one dwelling or extensions or your dream home, keep existing, build new, it usually means that they have a covenant that stops them from developing more units. How can you find out? Well, I've underlined there how the wording looks like. In the property title, you will see the word covenant, and then it will tell you the number and the date it was made. Now, if you do want to order the title yourself and you don't trust the documents that are provided to you, you can search land data property title and order it from there. And now, if you want to make sure you actually order the covenant, because it doesn't come up unless you tick the box, just make sure you follow the number that's stated on the property title front page and tick that box. It will say covenant and the same number. I've inserted in here one example from one of my projects where the covenant restricts the materials that can be used. In this case, it talks about having majority of the external walls made out of brick. It's actually a case where we're building a two-story dwelling at the back of an existing one. So imagine having external walls of brick will have implications due to its load on the structure and on the cost of the building. It's important to know these before you purchase the land because it will have implications on your feasibility study and your cost projections. Size and shape of the land. Now, we're all used to seeing real estate ads that approximate things in the advantage of the seller, where I see a lot of areas, total areas rounded up, sometimes by 10 or 20 square meters. Now, when we're talking about 700 square meters, that might not be a big thing, but sometimes it is, especially if we're talking about developments. And sometimes if we're talking about the total garden area um, applicable on the land, and if we're talking about thresholds that depend on the total area of the land, it does matter if you know the exact area. So how can we find out if we don't trust the ad? There are two ways. The more precise way is from the copy of the subdivision plan, where we'll have the dimensions. And if you're good in drawing software, or if you know someone who can draw this quickly for you, they can calculate the exact area of the land. Now, the other way is, and I will go back to the link that I popped in earlier to show you how you can find out and cross-check. this information. So if I go back to that link and go to the other tab that I have in here, the property PDF, you will see that it comes up with the dimensions, the total area, as well as the dimensions and the inflections of the boundaries. So for example, this area here will have 31.5 plus 8.5 meters in length. So you can do a quick calculation or draw it in any software that you know how to handle and do a quick calculation, but how you can see the total area directly there. So again, this is approximate. It's not as exact as if you draw from the title, but it helps you cross-check the information from the real estate ad um, if you don't trust it. I'll go back to the main presentation now. The other aspect that's very important to check is for easements, because easements, okay, so for someone who doesn't know what an easement is, it is a third-party interest in a portion of your land. It could be an area, and it's usually shown with a dotted line on the copies of the subdivision plans. That's the edge of the easement. It could be right that a water authority has on your land because they have a pipe underneath. And then they have that easement that will tell you you can or cannot do certain things on top of that easement. Now, if you start to have pipe easements, for example, on two sides of your land on the length and on at the rear, for example, you may already exclude a big portion of your land from the buildable area. And the total area advertised in the real estate agent's ad might not be the area that you actually can build on. So it's very important to find out about these easements. Now, there are areas that are very difficult to build on. I have seen a lot of triangular corners. I have seen weird shapes of the land. It does not necessarily mean that you can't use them, but you may end up with a build shape that is very expensive to build. It's very difficult to furnish internally, and it's really not worth building on. So have a look at what you can really fit on the land. If you don't see easements on the land, it does not mean that you don't have pipes. This is one mistake that I've seen even designers make, is not to check, and I will go through it in one of my next slides, not to check if there are actually pipes that do not have an easement created. Because if they're there and if they belong to someone else, such as a water authority, they will still trigger certain restrictions on your land, and you can't find out unless you order some documents that I will go through later. So don't trust just the size. Have a look at the shape as well and easements. Solar orientation. Why I'm saying this is a big one, it's not only for the well-being, but it also impacts what you can do on the site. Now, for those of you who might not be aware of this or might not understand it properly, might have some misconceptions around it, in Australia, as opposed to the Northern Hemisphere, north is actually the best orientation because it gets natural light throughout the day. Now, southern side is the one that will get no direct light throughout the day, but it gets a good indirect light. Southern orientation might be good for studies, for example, where you don't want that glare to come and go into your screen. Now, why is north important and why it's important to understand where north is? It's because the southern part will be the one that will be in the shade most of the time. And we definitely don't want our backyards, our living areas to be in the shade. They will feel bad and they will become moldy in time. If someone talks about a site that has northern orientation, that does not mean that the street is facing north. That means that the backyard is facing north. I see a lot of people looking at this for the first time and misunderstanding it. So when you hear something is south-oriented, it means that the backyard is facing south. If you hear it's north-oriented, it means that the backyard is facing north. The most challenging sites to build on are the ones that have north facing the street. And that is because during the day you will have potential to overshadow 3 or more adjoining lots, depending on how many neighbors you have. Definitely when the sun is coming from the east, you will overshadow your side in the west and south. And as it's moving through the day, you'll overshadow the south and then the eastern side of your property. If, for example, your site is facing north, meaning backyard to the north, part of the day it will be the street that will be mostly impacted. So you don't have to worry as much about impacting your neighbors. Now, I usually recommend clients do not purchase south-facing lots. They're very challenging to build on. However, there are some cases where it might be worth it, and that has to do with views. It may be a case where you're financially struggling to pay those additional $10,000 or $20,000 for a land that is north-facing. However, my advice is, if you can, wait and put that money aside to buy a north-facing lot versus a south-facing lot, do it. Pay that extra money because you'll see the benefit when you build is much higher than the cost. I will go through one standard that is impacted by the orientation. Standard B29. And also for one dwelling on a lot, it's standard A18. If a courtyard is south-facing, you may need to provide a secluded private open space that is much larger than the usual requirements. For those of you who don't know, a secluded private open space is an area of your garden to the side or rear of your lot that has good access from a living or dining room. That is like your private garden. And each dwelling has a requirement for something like this. Now, this standard is one that I see many developers not aware of, and it actually does. I'm just going to try to annotate if I can on the screen for you to understand. So let's just say that this is your courtyard here. And let's just say that we have a double-story building here with the second level recessed from the ground floor. This could be your second dwelling on the lot. Now, let's assume that the height of this second story is 6 meters, the height of this wall here. Now, if we apply this, it means that 0.9 multiplied by the height, 5.4, plus 2 meters, that is the setback that the end of your secluded private open space needs to have from this wall. So in here, we will have 7.4 meters. Now, if this second floor was only recessed 1 meter from the ground floor, let's say, it means that your secluded private open space ends up being a 6.4 meters wide space just because it's facing south. Now, in a situation where we consider that the standard dress code asks for a minimum width of 3 meters for this secluded private open space, just because of the fact that it's facing south, you need 6.4 meters. You can imagine it's taking a lot from the buildable area of the site. And again, I'm saying this especially for developers. However, it can impact you if you're building one dwelling on a land and the land is quite small. If it's been a result of a previous subdivision, it can highly impact your land as well. So have a look at the standard and before you purchase the land, have a look through it. If you want to read more, you can search planning scheme and the council you're looking at and go to clause 54 if you're looking at one dwelling, close 55 if you're looking at building more dwellings, and look for this standard, or just send me an email and I will guide you from there. Now, other aspects of solar orientation that can impact you. On the left, you will see a snapshot from a previous client of mine. She already built an off-the-shelf design, and she came to me asking for advice regarding the bedroom upstairs. You will see on this corner, she had the master bedroom upstairs, and the hours that you'll see here are during summer. She had that bedroom overheated during the early to late afternoon because she had corner windows. It was a nightmare. She could barely sleep in that room. And this is one outcome that you can get if you don't check the solar orientation of your site and if you don't try to overlap even if you want to build an off-the-shelf design, try to overlap that on the land and look at how the spaces will be oriented so that you can understand which one will be overheated, which one will get enough natural light, and which one will not. On the right-hand side, you will see an example. I actually have a client who did this. She had her heart fixed on an off-the-shelf design, and she was looking for a land that could fit that design. Now, I don't usually advise this is the way to go, but this is what she wanted to do. And what we could help with is overlay her preferred design on the land and provide advice around what changes she might need to make to that, or if she needs to mirror it on the land, or if she needs to push it back to the front, if she needs to protect certain areas from overheat. And we did stop her from purchasing quite a few blocks of land that were not appropriate for the design she wanted to have. Constraints above ground. Trees. Trees are a big one for some clients. I'm a big lover of nature, and I do encourage people to keep them wherever they can, because nature does contribute to our well-being. It's proven that it does. However, there could be cases where, due to the nature of the trees, if they're weed species or if they're in poor condition, they need to be cut as well. My advice, if the trees are on your land, check before you cut if you really need to cut. So if you know what you want to do on the land, have a look if that tree can be maintained, and check if you need a permit. Now, Glen Ira is one of the councils, for example, where you don't need a permit to cut a tree. And I've seen a lot of people just chop trees randomly because it's easier to have a clear land. But majority of the councils do require a permit. It's easier if you apply for the permit together with an application for what you're planning to do, or at least showing why you need to cut that tree, because you do have then arguments why that tree needs to be cut. Now, if it is a tree of a council or a neighbor's, you do need to consult with an arborist, or it's advisable to consult with an arborist. And there are two abbreviations here that you will see, TPZ and SRZ. TPZ refers to the tree protection zone, and SRZ refers to the structural root zone. There are areas that you need to consider. The SRZ is the area that you can't build over because the most important roots are in there. And the tree protection zone is a diameter, so it creates a diameter around an area around the tree that you can only encroach in 10%. So if we calculate the total area of that circle, 10% of that area, not 10% of the radius, 10% of that area is the area you can encroach on. If you don't want to pay an arborist, but you still want to understand how much the tree protection zone could be, there is a trick that I learned from an arborist. It's an estimation, so use it with care. However, it can be useful. And that is, have a look at the tree. If you can measure or estimate the diameter at 1.4 meters above ground, let's just say that is 400 millimeters, multiply that by 12, and then you will get your radius for the tree protection zone. So this is an estimation I use to determine the impact of a neighboring tree if I know clients don't want to appoint an arborist. However, I still encourage paying an arborist depending on the investment you're putting into the land. With the vehicular access, I'm always saying plan ahead. There are certain clients that I see that are placing the dwelling on the land, imaginary placing the dwelling on the land or the units without thinking where the access will be. And sometimes they're planning a vehicular access just straight on to an electrical post. Now, I'm not saying those cannot be moved, but it is expensive to move them, and sometimes you may not be able to. If you see an electric pole close to the place where you would like to place your crossing, just think about having at least 1 meter from that pole to the edge of your crossing. This is the rule of thumb. Now, it may determine the orientation of your off-the-shelf design if you're planning to do one of those on the land you're looking to purchase, because sometimes due to wanting to keep a crossing and not have to go through different permits, you may want to mirror the design, and then you have to look again if it's suitable for the living areas, the orientation, the soil orientation that you're looking at. Above ground, this is from one project that I had in Caulfield South, talking about slope of land. This was a case where we had 2.9 meters, I think, difference from the start of the block to the rear of the site. It did create quite a few issues or additional considerations that we had to have in cases where we don't want to consider split levels and we don't want to have steps. Not only because right now we may find them annoying, but in the future we have to think about the needs of the family. And as we grow older, we might find steps more and more annoying or disturbing. And they can impact our well-being and our comfort living inside the house. So in most cases, you'll see that clients or yourselves prefer to have uh, quite a quite a flat surface inside, so not split levels, as little steps as possible, at least on the ground floor. And in that case, you may need retaining walls at the back. You may need to dig quite a bit. This will have a high impact on the cost. You also have to look at any pipes you may be affecting. In this case, we had to actually deviate an asset of the water authority. It did add quite a bit to the cost. The other aspect for people who have not done this before is to understand that the height from natural ground level, so from the existing slope of the land, will impact the setback you have from the sides. And I will quickly draw something on the screen. In this case, let's just say the entire first floor has the same setback from the sides, which is not realistic because you usually need to have kick-ins and out for articulation. But for the purpose of this exercise, this would be the worst case scenario. So when you calculate the setback from the sides and how big your first floor will be, you have to take into consideration the worst case scenario. And in this case, we had to think very well and to consider a few options where if we were to dig more into the ground, we would have had a lower height and then lower setbacks. So the first floor would have been bigger. However, if we were going um, too much into the ground, we had to dig a lot more at the back. So it was finding that right balance. And this is what you have to do on slopey lands. There are a lot of variations around split levels and digging more, digging less, retaining walls. There's a lot of cost involved. Now, overhead power lines are something that, again, I see people ignoring and not having a look at. So when you look at the land, look up as well. And you might see power lines. Some of them have no impact because they're not close to you, or they're just telephone lines, they're yours only. Others may be connected to a neighbor, and then you have to check if you actually have to pay for doing some amendments to that. And others may be high voltage ones that actually have easements that you cannot build on. So have a look up as well. Now, underground, and this is the one that I mentioned is quite important. The dial before you dig is the website or the documents that I would like everyone to order when they are looking at their land. It's free of charge, and it will give you approximate information on any pipes that might be on your land, even if there's no easement. So if you go to 1100.com.au or you search dial before you dig, you will be able to create an account and order. You'll start getting a lot of emails with documents. Have a look at the ones that come from council and have assets, and have a look at the ones that come from the water authority, and scroll down, have a look at all the pipes. If you aren't sure, seek help, because this is very, very important, checking the pipes. I know we're going a bit over time because we didn't start on time, so hopefully everyone can still stay back. I wanted to show you quickly one case that I had on a project, and explain why I think it is important. Okay, so right now you should be able to see a floor plan, and I will show you the pipe at the back. The client initially had some design done by a building designer. It was okay, except that they did not consider anything about the pipes at the end. And what we see in here is not only a sewer to the back, but we also can see a connection branch that could be moved if you have where to move it, and you can apply for it. It does incur costs. However, in our design of the unit at the rear, we made sure that we actually set back from it from the beginning. We proposed the decking with the possibility of checking, and that we could obtain the build over approval. So we avoided actually having to amend this connection branch to change it. We avoided the additional costs, and we knew what pipes we have in there by checking all these documents. Why am I saying dial before you dig as opposed to ordering the pipes directly from the authorities? It's because it's free. So pretty much that's the main reason. It is free, and the sorry, I'm just trying to go back to my usual screen. Okay, so hopefully you should see my main screen right now. The other documents, the sewer depth offset, SDO, and property sewerage plan can be ordered from the water authority, but they do cost money, as well as the soil report. Yes, this can impact the construction cost and the details. However, you wouldn't do that before you purchase the land. With the soil, what you can have a look at is if you see there are a lot of infiltrations of water, you will know there are issues with the soil on that land. Now, I'll quickly go through the next slides because there's quite a bit to talk about, and I don't want to go into too many details. I'm conscious of time. With the surroundings, one thing that I wanted to say is that if you see something built in the area and you want to do the same, it does not mean that you can do the same. There are quite a few regulations that have changed in time, and one big one was in March 2017 with the garden area requirements. And the soil orientation can have an impact on what you can do as well. In here, you'll see an example of what a client of mine wanted to do and thought she can do, but we ended up with something different because it wasn't applicable on her side. Now, if you want to get more certainty, there's Nearmap. That is a paid subscription. I think the cheapest one is 1900 per year. Not worth paying if you're doing a one-off check, but worth exploring if your job involves checking sites in more detail. What to measure if you go on site? The ceiling height if you're keeping the existing dwelling, the clear dimensions of bedrooms. Don't trust real estate plans. If you're thinking about developing, a few red dots there. Check the setback to the north-facing neighboring windows within 3 meters of the boundary, because they will impact the setbacks you need to provide. So if you have neighbors to your north, no, if you are to the north of your neighbors, then check the windows within 3 meters of the boundary and check if they're habitable. Setbacks to eaves, covering neighboring windows. If you have a neighboring window that's super close to the boundary and they have an eave on top of that, and the distance between the eave and the boundary is less than 1 meter, that will mean you can't build on that boundary because you have to allow some space clear to the sky. So remember, between the eave and the boundary, less than 1 meter clear to the sky, you need to give that space on your land for them. If you want to keep the existing and subdivide, think about not necessarily being able to allow for two crossings. You might need to move a wall sometimes to create a 3 meters driveway. If that is less, I've seen councils insisting on that, even for 200 millimeters. Have a look at setbacks, number of car parking spaces. It's a feasibility study that can be done in quite a quick amount of time, so probably an hour or sometimes less, if you do want to engage a professional to have a look for you, just to avoid buying a land that cannot be subdivided so easily. Will you need a permit? Well, why is it important to know? Because it will impact the cost and timing. How can you find out? Calling councils, looking for professional advice, and checking planning controls yourself if you're more experienced in it. Question mark when you see STCA subject to council approval. Don't always believe what you see. I've seen a lot of cases where people get burned by believing. It's possible. What I do advise people is to get some over-the-counter feedback from council, meaning calling them or going there when the visits are possible. That's before purchasing the land. However, most certainty you can get by applying for pre-application advice, but that is a more costly exercise and probably something you want to do after you pay the deposit and secure the land. Existing and preferred neighborhood character, again, one where I will say, don't believe that if you see something on the street, you can do the same. Don't believe that if you see high fences with the secluded private open space to the front, you can do the same. The preferred character for the area might have changed, and especially for developments where you need council approval, this may not be possible. So again, don't plan for what you see in the neighborhood. Again, how to find out, you can go to the planning scheme of that specific council. You can search neighborhood character study, let's just say that was in Dandenong Council, and you will find out for that specific area what they're looking for. It can impact quite a few aspects of your land if you haven't worked with a particular council before. For example, Dandenong doesn't like to see double story at the rear. Some councils prefer to not see buildings attached. They want them to be separated. And it could impact how many crossings you have. For example, Monash really doesn't like to see multiple crossings. Now, we've reached the end. I think I was on time considering the starting time, so hopefully that was helpful. There's quite a bit of information to go through. So as I said at the beginning, I will offer my email here. If you have no idea, if you would like to know more, if you have a specific case and you want to know how to go about it, write me an email, and if we can help with guiding you, we will do that. If there's services we can offer, we will offer them. You can then choose if those are helpful for you or not, but at least we will let you know how you can go about it. And if there's advice or links we can give to you, we will do that. Now,